So I want to first start by saying thanks to Annette Robertson and Marcella Walsh and all the people behind the scenes who have made today possible and who have made my time here engaging and exciting. And thanks to all of you for bringing conversation and questions and attention to the various talks that have been going on. First, I'd like to say that I am representing a larger group, the Public Interactives Research Lab, which is housed in the School of Arts, Technology, and Emerging Communication at the University of Texas at Dallas. And the lab is a space that invites faculty, researchers, and students, and both undergraduate students and graduate students, to come together to think about interactive experiences in public spaces. And so what I want to do with this talk today is two things. One, I want to give you an overview of the type of projects that members of the lab have been working on and have worked on. But also, I want to offer a preview for the upcoming breakout sessions where we are also, the team, the larger team, and I are going to be leading a workshop. And so you should have found on your tables a large formatted sheet. And what I would like for you to do is open that sheet, or if it hasn't been folded, turn it to the side where you see the word interaction. And I'd like you to think about the word interaction. And I would like for you to think about what it looks like. And it might help to select a particular interactive experience that you've experienced and think through, what did that interaction involve? How did it unfold or play out? How did it feel? And what did it accomplish? For whom? So just take a moment, and I'm going to give you a moment to kind of think through your pen on page. And I'm going to pause right there because we are under a time constraint. We will return to a discussion of this in just in the workshop session. And I'd like for you to turn your attention to the second word that appears on the page, public. What is a public? You might want to think about which publics you belong to. Who else belongs to those publics? What does that public do? How does it behave? How do you recognize it as a public? And what other labels or names, hearkening back to earlier in the day, what other labels or names does this public go by? So take a moment and maybe jot a few thoughts down on the page. So at a fundamental level, the lab is committed to thinking about, but also through, the relation between these two concepts. And we're committed to thinking through the importance of language, how language matters when one is designing, especially designing with a larger public in mind. And so with that, Pearl investigates the particularity of what some of Pearl's, an underlying topic of Pearl's investigations happens to be how technologies take place in public spaces. And by emphasizing the take place, what I'm interested in and what we're interested in is acknowledging that technologies are never separate from a context. They take place in and shape and inform the environments that we find ourselves in and the kinds of interactions that are made possible in those environments. And so they're doing a kind of cultural work. They're shaping how people engage with each other and understand each other and their surroundings. And so given this broader construct for approaching, or broader framework for approaching what we do, we think in terms of a set of three underpinning premises, I suppose. First of all, we understand all experiences to be mediated experiences. Nothing is ever free from mediation, in other words. And mediated experiences are always situated. They are happening someplace for someone or someones in a particular time and in a particular way, right? And so we're interested in how mediated experiences might open on to new ways of understanding, new awarenesses. And as a consequence, we're interested in how those might shape new kinds of engagement between people, across peoples. And so we're interested in how, in being aware of how mediation works, how mediated environments work, how relationships get shaped, we're interested in what it might mean to imagine those experiences opening onto new habits, new conversations, and new shared experience, new shared understandings. So I want to take a moment and unpack the sort of three premises I just glossed by offering three separate but related examples that will illustrate how we're understanding the relationship between technology and interaction and publics. First, I want to re-articulate the first premise in a way, and I want to ask the question: what is the place of technology in our practice? And so my first example starts with the fact that we might not be starting with technology at all. We might be starting with a kind of content, a kind of audience, or a particular kind of message. And so the first example that I offer is an example that starts from an already built website, a scholarly website developed at the University of South Carolina, where public historian graduate students compiled a set of histories about the historic core campus of the University of South Carolina, which is often recognized as a surprisingly intact landscape of slavery. They did incredible research. The website is robust, it's informative, but it's relatively static. And in fact, it gets very few hits. And our question was, well, how do you get more people engaged with that history? How else might we encourage people to learn about this history? And our thought was, what if we encourage people to actually engage with that history on site? It is at the core of campus. How do you get people to think about this particular history on site? And so we turned to what we had on hand, first generation iPads and Garmin geolocative technologies, and relied on a Bluetooth interface. That opened onto its own set of problems, but we were interested in what happened when people gathered on the horseshoe grounds and began traversing those grounds with the iPad, with each other, at the interface of an iPad. And so in that instance, we did not start from technology to a certain extent. We started with a different catalyst. And so this is one of the first points we like to think about when we're in the lab, is that technology is not necessarily first. Our second, this opens onto a second example about designing for awareness. Again, this is an example from the University of South Carolina, where we were interested in another set of public history projects that were investigations that were interrogating the unacknowledged history of urban renewal that made possible that university's westward expansion at the expense of a predominantly African American community. And we were compelled by the fact that former residents of that community were eager to share their stories about growing up in the shadow of the flagship research institution. And so we thought, what if we could encourage people to explore the space and bring voice, quite literally, to the site, on site, in real time, as someone is traversing the streetscape? What would it mean punctuate the streetscape with archival photographs of what had been, in place, overlaid the what is now. And so we were interested in what would that look like, how would that motivate people and invite new awareness of place. My third example, and I'm looking at the time, so I should probably breathe too, is about designing for engagement. And I'm hoping that what becomes clear is, I think the three premises that I posed at the beginning, you see running throughout. But I'm using three different examples to illustrate and highlight certain particularities across them. Our third catalyst has been the AIDS Memorial Quilt. And the AIDS Memorial Quilt is the world's largest work of public art. And it spans approximately 1.3 million square feet and is still growing. It was started in 1987 to commemorate the lives of those who had died of AIDS, but also it functioned as a political gesture, right? To force visibility on an epidemic that the nation wanted to not notice. And so we were wondering, what would it mean to provide access to a cultural object that no one can actually access in one visit? First of all, you can't visit all the places where it's stored, and it can't actually be laid out for one to walk among the blocks at any one given time. I think the estimate is it would take, if you stood 1 minute at each block, it would take you 33 days to view the entire quilt. So how do you provide access to something that vast in scale? At the same time, the quilt is as a material object, as an object of cloth and stitching, right, is also a very fragile object, and it's deteriorating. So how do you preserve that object? And so the large format touchscreen device became a way to think through those questions, but it also opened on to new questions, and that is, how might the touchscreen interface evoke the tactility that inheres in the cultural heritage object? That is, how might we imagine the tactility of the fabric being a way or a guide for the hands of those interacting with the screen to interact with the digital object? And how might such embodied experience catalyze additional stories, reflections, and insights? And it never fails to be the case that stories, reflections, and personal insights happen at the interface of the AIDS Quilt Touch project. I draw my talk to a close in pointing to two other tenets, we might call them. I'm hazarding to use the word best practices, but since that's but two of the things that we like to keep in mind as we're thinking through our projects is the fact that we want to embrace the idea that design goes all the way down and all the way up, or as it says on the screen, design goes all the way up and all the way down, and that designers design with, not for their publics. That is, designers are not separate from. They are part of the publics with which they're designing. And with that, thank you.